Welcome to Sunday Mornings. Chuck Todd, take care of Meet the Press. I'm Jeff Wagner in for Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, one of the comedy greats of our generation passed away. Joan Rivers was 81 years old. President Obama made a brief stop in Milwaukee on Monday to address supporters at Labor Fest. Interestingly, Mary Burke, the Democrat who wants to be governor, did everything she possibly could to avoid being photographed with the president. I guess it's not 2008 anymore. The plan to build a 44-story Couture apartment project on the lakefront is headed to the county board for final approval. Gee, let's think this through. What's better for the area? A $122 million building that will bring people to the lakefront, or the semi-abandoned bus depot that sits on the spot now? Don't be surprised if some on the county board vote for the abandoned bus depot. And several celebrities found their cell phones and tablets had been hacked into, and nude photographs of themselves have been posted on the internet. The first lesson is that hitting delete doesn't really delete things. The second is Wagner's rule of life number 4. Unless you're a porn star, and maybe even then, don't take naked photographs of yourself. But first, on Thursday, a relative handful of fast food workers in Milwaukee staged a protest demanding to be paid $15 an hour. The workers claim that while their employers are making billions of dollars, they're not able to make ends meet. For his part, President Obama is also calling for an increase in the federal minimum wage, although not to $15 an hour. Democrats seem to feel that this is a winning issue as they head into the elections this November. The problem, of course, is that the money to pay for government-mandated increased wages has to come from somewhere, and that somewhere will most likely be increased costs for consumers. So, should the minimum wage be increased, and if so, by how much? Joining me on the panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, State Senator Alberta Darling, and State Representative Jim Ott. Okay, Michael Holt, let's start with you. $15 an hour for flipping burgers. Are these people out of their minds?
No, they're not out of their minds. I think what you do sometimes, you shoot for the moon and hope you land in the stars. You know, I think it's realistic to look at maybe $10 an hour. $10 an hour would actually lift 4 million people out of poverty. $15 an hour would mean that the McDonald's and the Burger Kings would end up closing down or charging $10 for a burger, which nobody's going to buy.
Okay, so why not then say $10 an hour? Because I think a lot of people say $15 an hour. What's possibly going on here? Nobody can afford $15 an hour for what it's going to do to the cost of food.
But like I said, you shoot high, and then you compromise on a little less. Okay. And I think that's essentially what they're trying to do.
Jim Ott, the protests that happened on Thursday involved a relative handful of people, but some arrests and some civil disobedience, including Milwaukee's Congressman Gwen Moore getting detained / arrested, whatever. Do these protests help the cause?
I really don't think so, Jeff, and you have to look at common sense. Last I checked, the law of supply and demand still works. And if you artificially lower the price of a commodity, what that means is that there's going to be shortages, because the price is going to be lower than what the market will bear. If you artificially raise the price of a commodity, that's going to actually cause decreased need for it or want for it. And in this case, if you artificially raise the price of what the market will bear for workers, the employers are going to have to get the money from someplace, and they're going to raise their prices. It's going to decrease demand.
Okay, but what about the argument that workers, you can't make do on $7 an hour or $8 an hour? You can't support a family of 4 on that. I mean, is any sympathy to that argument at all?
Well, certainly there's sympathy to that argument. Everyone would like to make more, and that's why we do have incentives to work harder, get an education, so that we don't have to stay in minimum wage jobs. It's also interesting to note that in places like North Dakota, where there's a big demand for workers, the wages are considerably higher than the minimum wage for fast food workers. The other thing is, certainly if the minimum wage was raised to $10, $15 an hour, unquestionably, some minimum wage workers would benefit, but some would lose their jobs.
Well, I mean, I think a lot would end up losing their jobs. Okay, Alberta Darling, let's talk about the state minimum wage. Okay, I think most rational people would realize 15 bucks an hour isn't going to happen. But what about what Michael's talking about, a gradual increase from $7 and whatever to $10 over 3 or 4 years? Is that doable, and should it be done?
I think that the minimum wage issue is a political ploy right now to gin up the base to get out for the Democratic Party. The minimum wage isn't going to happen. Most fast food workers are not paid the minimum wage. They're paid more than that, and they get health care in many cases. So this issue is an issue that isn't real, and people need to have a free market. And minimum wage wasn't meant as a family supporting wage. It was meant as a startup wage. And if we didn't have a minimum wage that was realistic, we wouldn't have a lot of jobs, and we wouldn't have the entryway into the job market for a lot of young people and a lot of other people.
Michael Holt, let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. President Obama in town on Monday talking about the minimum wage. Obviously, he seems to think moving into the November elections that that's a political winner. Is it?
Yeah, I think he'll rally his base, but the folks who he's speaking to the choir. He's singing to the choir. The same people he's talking about are going to vote for the Democratic Party candidate anyway. So, I mean, it is, I think Margaret's right, I think it is a way to rally the base and raise another issue that they can tie into.
Yeah, I think, I personally think one of the reality is $15 an hour isn't going to happen. It's just not, it's not real. I wonder if you could rally the base by saying $8 or $9 an hour just as well. And as far as these arrests go, I mean, goodness gracious, it seems to me that's not helping the cause, but that's just me. Okay, what has your glass half full and what has your glass half empty? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, my glass is half empty because the Green Bay Packers got spanked, punked out in the first game of the season. But it's half full because it's still early and hopefully they will redeem themselves.
Alberta Darling.
My glass is half full because of Wisconsin, because of the Wisconsin economy. While the Democrats are actively rooting against our state, our chief executive magazine said Wisconsin is quickly becoming one of the best states in the country for business, moving us from 41st to 14th. My glass is half empty because of the Brewers. The Brewers did everything right at the beginning, but darn it, they couldn't pull it off to the end. It's been a bad ending, but a very exciting season in general.
Jim Ott.
You know, Jeff, some of our glasses look a little bit the same today. The glass is half empty because it's been a rough stretch for the Brewers and a bad start for the Packers. It's half full because there's still time for the Brewers to turn things around and plenty of time for the Packers to have a great season.
And my glass is half full because there will soon be a lot more cabs on the streets of Milwaukee. It's half empty because some of those new cabs might take away business from the hardworking cab drivers who've been driving for years. Hopefully, all the new cabs are going to encourage more people to use cabs, and everybody will benefit. Next on Sunday Insight, did the chairman of the Democratic National Committee go too far in using the language of domestic abuse to describe Governor Walker's record on women's issues? Well, Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz appeared in Milwaukee on Wednesday and attacked Governor Walker's records on women's issues. Wasserman Schultz, who is always a lightning rod, raised eyebrows by using language that raised the image of domestic abuse. For example, she claimed that Walker has given women the back of his hand and has grabbed women by the hair and pulled them back. Wasserman Schultz has been pretty roundly criticized for her over-the-top language. Regardless, the so-called war on women is obviously going to be a theme for this year's governor's race in Wisconsin. So have Republicans in Wisconsin, and the governor in particular, been engaged in a war on women, and will this resonate with the voters? Okay, let's start with State Senator Alberta Darling. You've signed on to a lot of the Walker agenda. Why do you hate women?
I don't, and there isn't a war on women. The Democrats have created the war on women because they don't want to talk about the failed policies about our economy, foreign policy, and immigration, and others. Walker has been is a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout, a son of a preacher man. He has one of the strongest records for women. Women care about the economy as much as men because you know what? Women do the budgets. They have to put bread on the table. They know where the money goes. They are as concerned about men as anyone, and so I think she's she's diminishing the role of women. I think we have to, as Republicans, we have to go out and show Walker's record of his achievements in growing the economy, jobs, getting rid of deficits and debts. And he has to show he's been a strong advocate for women. He spent $27 million on the Justice Center at Children's Hospital to help domestic violence victims and foster care children. He has been an advocate for women.
Well, let's talk about that specifically. I mean, clearly the references that she was using was designed to bring out the domestic violence,
extremely offensive.
Back of the hand, grabbing
absolutely.
women. From a female perspective, I mean, politics isn't beanbag, but still.
I think that is below the belt, and she diminishes herself by using such foul language. Scott Walker is a champion for women. Women are as interested in the economy as men. Scott Walker did not deserve that, and we should stand up. Actually, there's going to be a big ripple effect because of what she's done. People are going to stand up and say, look, that's not right. But Walker has to get out and tell his record, because he has a strong record on against domestic violence, against mental health issues, working on mental health issues. He has 4 female secretaries, heads of departments, and a female lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
Actually, for health, education, children, DNR, and tourism. He's extremely supportive of women.
Michael Holt, in the last segment we were talking about the politics of the minimum wage. Let's talk about the politics of the war on women. Is this an issue that's going to resonate?
Again, we can go back to the last segment and I can repeat myself all over again.
It goes to the base.
Yeah, 58% of women, potential women voters, are going to vote for Mary Burke. I mean, so
or vote against Walker, right? Doesn't matter against Walker, running against Walker, they're going to vote against Walker.
If you really want to start getting into specifics, if you have to really start defining what the war against women means, if you're pro-life, does that mean you're opposed to women? Yeah. I mean, by definitions. I mean, this is a very, very sticky subject, it's a slippery slope. Some people say that she went overboard in some of these accusations in some of her comments, backhand, which implies domestic abuse, etc. But the women who are going to vote against Walker are going to vote against him regardless.
Jim, let's talk about the agenda. In your mind, what are some of the primary, the two, say, primary issues for women in Wisconsin that they should care about, and where is the legislature on those?
Well, as Alberta said, women do the budgeting in the House many times. They're the ones who pay the bills, and so obviously they're very concerned about the economy. They're certainly very concerned about employment and good unemployment rate. That's certainly an issue. Taxes, I think, is a big issue. Jeff, this whole thing with the war on women, I mean, it's like, come up with a term and just keep repeating it over and over and don't pay attention to substance. Number one, it's an insult to Republican women. Total insulting. What are they saying? That the Republican women are having a war on themselves. Secondly, the governor signed a number of bills this past session to actually help victims of domestic violence. And so to use this analogy is so over the top, it's ridiculous. Third, if you want to talk about real wars, the Democrats, I believe, are having a war on taxpayers. We had 3 tax cuts in the legislature in the last session. First one was in the budget, a cut in the income tax. Every Democrat in the legislature voted against the tax cut, the budget. 2 other tax cuts, the only members of the legislature in the assembly who voted against them were Democrats. And then you put that together with the tax increases of the Doyle's last term. I think that's a real war on taxpayers.
Well, I think clearly the remarks that were made were way over the top, but I think the answer is we're into the silly season, and this won't be the first time, and it's probably not going to be the last time over the next couple months that we're going to hear over-the-top stuff. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell it to you anyways. Let's dish out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt.
Well, my advice is to the Fire and Police Commission. You folks really need to pay heed to complaints of black citizens. Turning a blind eye to complaints could cost the city more than you're really willing to pay.
Alberta Darling.
To Debbie Wasserman Schultz, do your homework before you come to Wisconsin.
Let's talk to Jim Ott.
Jeff, based on the disastrous track record of global warming predictions over the last 20 years, if you're into making climate predictions, you may want to go a little farther out, like far enough so that none of us will be around to know that your predictions were wrong.
You can take the meteorologist out of the studio, but you can't take the studio out of the meteorologist. My unsolicited advice goes to Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. The Public Service Commission says that residents of the city will have to pay tens of millions of dollars to move utility lines for your downtown trolley. Mayor Barrett just dropped his stupid idea once and for all. Next on Sunday Insight, a teenager shot and killed while allegedly committing armed robbery. What's going on in Milwaukee? Well, early last Monday morning, a 15-year-old was shot and killed as he attempted to rob a West Dallas man at gunpoint. The would-be robber is thought to be part of a group of teenagers who are responsible for up to 35 area armed robberies. The 15-year-old who was shot and killed had previously been arrested on charges relating to armed robbery, auto theft, and fleeing. He had apparently also been shot August 1st during a separate incident. This is at least the third recent case where relatively young criminals have been shot while attempting to commit robberies. In all these cases, the criminals had relatively extensive records, yet were still on the streets. Many of the crimes were also committed late at night, raising the question of what are young people doing running the streets at all hours of the night? So, can anything be done to stop this recent wave of youth crime? Jim Ott.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jeff, one thing cries out loud and clear, and you mentioned the cases where the criminal has been shot. There have also been a series of tragic incidents in Milwaukee where innocent people were shot, caught in crossfires, and the one thing that keeps coming out time after time is you look at the perpetrator, you look at their record, and the question is asked, why were they still out on the street? And in many cases, there were opportunities that these people could have been behind bars. I know you're talking about teenagers, you're talking about young people, but when somebody commits an armed robbery, they show a willingness to point a weapon at somebody, threaten their life. It's a serious crime. You can't go and slap them on the hands. If they're in jail or in prison, they're not going to do it again.
Well, it's the consequences of no consequences. Okay, Michael Holt, this is affecting the north side, it's affecting the near south side. Kids, that they're out committing these horrible crimes. Is there an answer?
Well, I mean, we can get into dysfunctional families, the absence of fathers providing, the kids with, the rites of passage and what to be a man. We can talk about poverty, all the rest. One of the things that really hit me when I originally heard this story was that you mentioned 3 youths who were killed, but there's been like a half dozen shootings by business people of these criminals who are coming in, and in every case have been exonerated. So I think people are really, really getting fed up, and it's almost like saying, let's keep guns, and if you come in, we're going to just pop you. Well, but is that penetrating in the minds of these criminals? Do they really think that they can just walk in and get away with the crimes?
Well, obviously the message hasn't gotten out, because with concealed carry, it's a much different world. There's no question about it. I mean, Alberta, darling, can anything be done?
Yeah, we can enforce the law. Hello. We have laws on the books, but they're not being enforced. They're not being prosecuted. These kids are thugs. They're habitual criminals. They know they can get away with it, so they do. We've got to get really, I don't want to just say tough, but we have to enforce the law. Mayor Barrett and Chief Flynn want us to create new laws. But, new laws won't be enforced. So what's the point? We have to get these habitual offenders. If they commit crimes with guns, they should go to prison, and they should serve time. Well, then we should stop the revolving door. There have to be consequences. If there are no consequences, this behavior is going to continue, and it's getting very serious in the city. It's affecting our climate.
We're talking about armed robberies and things like that, but quality of life, one of the things I don't understand is in Milwaukee, we've got curfew rules, and all these stories are 14 and 15-year-old kids that are out in the middle of the night committing these serious types of crimes. I agree with you. You got to stop the revolving door, and you got to deal with root causes as well. So, okay, what is it that you don't get? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
What I don't get is why Milwaukee has the highest black infant mortality rate in the country, but is none among the cities receiving a federal grant to address the problem.
Alberta Darling.
What I don't get is the hatred and anger that drives the Democrats like Debbie Wasserman Schultz to say such vile and unnecessary false things about Scott Walker that just are floating in her head, and she feels she can just spew them. This vile has just got to stop.
Jim Ott.
Jeff, it's interesting. More problems coming up with the Affordable Care Act. We find that the hacker gets into part of the system. New required insurance forms may not be ready in time, and no one is sure how people will reapply for next year. And Health and Human Services continues to call the program a success.
Well, what I don't get is why the Brewers fired Ned Yost when the Brewers went into the tank at the end of 2008, but apparently aren't contemplating dumping Ron Renicky following the Brewers' recent and much more dramatic freefall. Next on Sunday Insight, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. First, though, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, Milwaukee's a loser because the Black Health Coalition was denied continued funding to address black health disparities, including black infant mortality. My winner, I'm really proud of the new generation of civil rights champions who are continuing our fight to end injustice, police misconduct, and political apathy. I had my doubts about whether they would pick up the baton. I'm ecstatic that they did.
Alberta Darling.
My winner is Scott Walker. A violent, offensive rant by the head of the DNC has poked the bear. Expect Republicans to be even more fired up to support Governor Walker. Now the loser. One more time, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Her apology was not an apology. What she said was wrong, embarrassing, offensive, and she owes it to the victims of domestic violence to actually say she's sorry for her vile remarks.
Jim Ott.
Jeff, my loser this week is also Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz for her outrageous comments about Scott Walker. If she wants to debate policy, fine. But if that's all she can come up with is insulting and over-the-top rhetoric, I guess she doesn't have much to talk about. My winners, Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Clayfish and State Senator Leah Buchner for calling Wasserman Schultz out.
And my loser this week is Democrat candidate for Attorney General Susan Happ, whose office dramatically reduced sexual assault charges against a guy who had business dealings with Happ and her husband. Can you say conflict of interest? My winner is former Milwaukee Alderman Tom Nardelli, who unexpectedly passed away this week. Tom was a great guy and a great public servant. He will be missed. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.